Welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome to part 9 in the Secrets of the Stroudwater series. Today we're going to have a look at a bit of a battle. Now earlier in the companion series, Secrets of the Thames and Severn Canal, we looked at a previous battle which happened towards the end of the 20th century, and that was the Battle of the Latin Bypass. But earlier, much earlier, some 200 years before that, towards the end of the 17th century, there was another battle right here at Upper Framilode, and it's all about the Battle of Carter's Close during the early stages of the construction of the Stroudwater Canal during its fourth phase. Hope you can join me here again on West Country Wanderings for another Secrets of the Stroudwater here at Upper Framilode. So first of all, where are we today? Well, I'm next to the River Severn. No, we're not back on the Severn Way. I did that last year and the year before that. The entire length of the Severn from its source in the middle of Wales down to Bristol. But previously we've been looking at sections of the Stroudwater and how its history came about. Now this is the first one you've seen of this series, Secrets of the Stroudwater. Just to recap, there were 3 previous earlier incarnations of the Stroudwater, which is why the series isn't called the Stroudwater Canal. We're actually looking at the 4th incarnation, the final one, which led to the construction of the Stroudwater Navigation as we know it today, from here where it joined the River Severn right through to where it joins the Thames and Severn Canal in the town of Stroud in the middle part of Gloucestershire. So we're looking at Cotswold, what are known as collectively the Cotswold Canals. Now the first canal though that was constructed was actually a navigation in itself, but it was making navigable sections of the River Froom, which enters the River Severn here just slightly to the north of where I'm talking to you at the moment. And that scheme was Kemet's scheme, where they made sections of the River Froom navigable, and they put in loops around mills and weirs using cranes and containerisation. That act that led to that happen was the 1730 Stroudwater Act. And it was using that original act from 1730 that the company of proprietors of the Stroudwater hoped to build a connection from here, Upper Framilode, right through to the town of Stroud without passing a further act. And therein laid a problem. Now, objectors to the original canal, Kemet's Canal, and this later Stroudwater Navigation, including people like Joseph Faithorn, who came from Dursley, Samuel Beard from the town of Stonehouse, and also the vicar, the Reverend from St Sire's Church, because the line of the canal, this new Stroudwater Navigation, was going to go right through his graveyard and slice it in two. So he was objecting it too. So basically you had the mill owners and the landowners objecting to this new canal. The reasons for those objections were mixed, but they basically fell into 2 camps. The first one concerning landowners directly, because they felt that the new canal would actually make the cost of their land, or the price of their land, drop. So they were worried about that. They're also worried about access to the land. So if they had a field, for example, canal goes right through it, they got cattle grazing, how do they get them from one side of canal to t'other? So that was part of the objection. The other part of it was to do with flooding issues over the land, because part of the canal was going to be on a raised embankment. If it was leaking water, would it flood their fields? The second camp of the objectors were mainly concerning the mill owners, and they were concerned that the new locks that are going to be here on the Stroudwater would take water capacity away from driving their water wheels and their mills, and their, of course, potentially their income. So they were getting quite angry with this new proposal. They'd already had 3 previous ventures looking at getting the Stroudwater through, which of course have failed. Some of them were also using part of Kemet's Canal, part of the River Froom that had been made navigable, and they were using that at quite a cheap rate. And they were concerned with this new navigation coming through here, they will be charged a lot more for freighting their goods up and down this new navigation than what they could use using just sections of the River Froom, which, as I said, they were doing quite cheaply. So there were a number of objectors, mill owners, landowners, lots of people locally, including people down as far down as Bristol, people up as far as Worcester as well. So because they had landowners all over the place, and they own pockets of land here and there and everywhere, just like they do these days, except people then tend to be abroad more, don't they, owning pockets of land these days. Anyway, that's another story, just to say that planning issues are nothing new at all. Now, the mill owners included people like Richard Clutterbuck, Daniel Partridge and Thomas Turner from Ebley Mills. They were very, very powerful people in the Stroud valleys, and they decided to get together with the various landowners from here far and wide, and they had a meeting at the George in Froster, a village about 3 or 4 miles away from where I'm currently standing, to see what they could do to object to this new canal. Now, the 1759 Act of the Canal, the later one, specifically forbade construction of locks. But the 1730 Act, the earlier one that was to do with Kemet's Canal, did not, because there was no purpose of having locks in those days. They were going to use these arms of cranes to freight them around using containerization, the first form of containerization anywhere in the world at Kemet's Canal, here on Stroudwater Navigation. Yeah, it's amazing that. So there was lots of objections. How did things come to a head, and what on earth was Carter's Close? So what is Carter's Close? No, it's not a cul-de-sac of some houses. Just to explain a little bit more of the logistics of where we are. Just round the corner here, coming into the River Severn, is the original arm of the Stroudwater Canal. It's a section that's now abandoned. So if you go to Saw Junction on the Gloucester-Sharpness Canal, the Stroudwater Canal originally went straight across. Gloucester-Sharpness, of course, landed later, building in effect a crossroads of canals there. But the section from Saw Junction to here was abandoned, because once that section of Gloucester-Sharpness was built, the ships and all the boats decided to use that way, much safer passage up towards Gloucester and then up towards Worcester direction, using the more navigable section. Here the river is dangerous. But before the Gloucester-Sharpness Canal was built, this is where the Stroudwater ended up after the town of Stroud. And just round there is Framilode Lock. That's the last lock on the Stroudwater, or the first lock, depending on which way you're travelling, which is where the Stroudwater Canal entered into the land there, turning off. And there was a lock there. There was also a mill there, Framilode Mill. Unfortunately, all that area now is private. There's a private house there, and you can't get access to see exactly where the lock and the canal join the River Severn. Alongside that, through the land there, was Carter's Close. It was effectively a large pasture field known as Carter's Close, and in order to get the canal connected to the River Severn, they had to slice through the land to build it. But therein lay a very, very big problem and a big trap for the company of proprietors of the Stroudwater Canal to fall right into. Now, one of the Stroudwater proprietor heavyweights was a gentleman known as Benjamin Graysbrook, and with his team of surveyors, he'd actually done some work on water capacities and water flows to do with the River Frome. And he actually overcame one of the main objections by the mill owners by saying that they actually weren't managing their water supply correctly. They utilised it, they wouldn't run out of water during the summer months, not the winter months, during the summer months, which tend to obviously be drier usually. And because they weren't doing that was why sometimes they were running out of water. And the Stroudwater Navigation, because it would have its own sluices and a reservoir as well, it would not affect their water flow in any way whatsoever. But the landowners were still not happy at all. Now, construction of the Stroudwater Canal began right here at Framilode on the 14th of February 1775, and within 6 weeks of the navvies cutting the cut right through the land here, and the first section, which was the bit connecting directly up to the River Severn and building Framilode Lock, there was rumblings, legal rumblings and wranglings following on the fallout of all the objections, meeting at the George Inn at Froster. Things came to a head on the 18th of March. On the 18th of March, a gentleman called Mr. Parry, who was the land agent for a gentleman called Robert Dobbins Yate, Yate as in the town of South Gloucestershire, which we'll also come on to later in the video because it's got connections to our story, said that his man had agreed to sell to the company of proprietors and passed a message to that effect to Richard Hall, who was looking after with the team of the navvies and the workmen in this part here of Framilode. So work was beginning to cut through this land because they now said that that parcel of land, the pasture known as Carter's Close, was now in the ownership of the company of proprietors and they could go ahead with cutting through Carter's Close. Alas, things got very difficult indeed. On the 8th of April, Richard Hall from the company proprietors went over to meet Robert Dobbins Yate near his home, near to the city of Hereford, to discuss the final details of the arrangement of the transfer of the land ownership to themselves, to the Stroudwater Navigation Company, what was going to be. And everything was fine, everything was agreed, and instructions were sent to the navvies here working on location that they could now cut through Carter's Close to the canal being built. And that is exactly what started to happen. Now, nearby landowners were the Purnells, and they owned the mill at Framilode, which is now basically a pub, restaurant there. It was Iron Mills. 19th April, they instructed their agent, one William Coley, to go to the site here to instruct the navvies to stop, to cease and desist, if you like, any further work cutting through the land, Carter's Close. But why did the Purnells have the authority to do that? After all, they were working on the 1730 Act, should I say, to get the Stroudwater Navigation cut through. So what was their main objection? Well, things got a little bit complicated. Now, because William Coley's note did not state exactly why the reasons that the men should stop work, they basically just ignored it and carried on as you would, because there was no legal ramifications for the note itself. However, 2 days later, William Coley returned to the site here at Upper Framilode to see 100 navvies digging ferociously away through Carter's Close. This time he got more aggressive and erected 2 large signs saying work on this land could not continue for legal reasons. Again, Benjamin Gray's book stepped in on behalf of the Stroudwater Navigation team and said that the navvies could carry on digging. So that's exactly what they did. Now, when William Coley returned here to Upper Framilode, he was accompanied by John Purnell from Framilode, not with his partner William, but just John Purnell himself. And John Purnell insisted that he owned the lease here of Carter's Close and that the navvies had no right to be cutting and digging through his land. But the team from the Stroudwater's Navigation did not believe Purnell. They did not believe that he was the rightful leaseholder because, of course, they'd had the discussions with Dobbins Yate. Their top man, Richard Hall, had been to Hereford to meet the man himself, and he told him they'd sold the land to him. So what was the confusion? Now, amongst the pro-canal people, the general consensus was that Purnell was either making this up, and when it later turned out that he did actually own the lease to Carter's Close, they thought that he just bought it to spite them so he could deliberately object with William Purnell the construction of the canal. However, that was not true because John and William Purnell actually obtained the lease for Carter's Close way back in August of 1767, so many years before the construction of the Stroudwater was even started. So what was going on here? Well, it was a trap, of course. Dobbin's Yates was against the canal as well, and it was a trap fell into because they hadn't done their homework, the company proprietors properly legally, though Dobbin Yates had given his word that he passed on ownership to them. In actual fact, he had not. Now the Stroudwater Committee tried to reach a compromise with the Purnells. Basically what they said to them is they could have freightage on their new canal at a much reduced rate, but only the section going down towards Whitminster and Framilode area, not the entire length of the canal. The Purnells considered this new arrangement but decided that it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't to allow them to continue building along Carter's Close. They decided to take things further onto a legal plane. Undaunted by this though, the committee of the Stroudwater had been continuing works to such an extent that Framilode Lock had almost been complete. On the 17th of May 1775, Mr. Dalloway, yes he of the original scheme, laid the first stone there, and then work could continue building that lock section, that important lock between the Stroudwater and the River Severn. Hearing that the first stone had been laid by Dalloway at the Framilode Lock site had enraged the Purnells from Framebridge to such an extent that they used a body of men, local men, to fill in the canal during the night time. So you had a bunch of navvies during the daytime digging ferocious way across Carter's Close, and at night time all of that work was being undone by Purnell's men, filling it back in again. Of course, things could not continue, and there was a meeting held in the town of Yate, now in the county of South Gloucestershire, just a few miles from here, to bring things to a fruition. Unfortunately, it still wasn't that simple, and things were not resolved. That meeting in Yate had the heavyweights of Robert Perry, William Dalloway and Benjamin Graysbrook amongst many others on the Stroudwater time, and many of the original objectors, the mill owners and the landowners, were also there at Yate. It was a very, very heated meeting. It never came to a successful conclusion, and the opponents objecting to this navigation, the Stroudwater Navigation, decided to go down the legal route. The objectors had got their solicitors' letter together, and that went off to the Court of the Exchequer in Westminster to get an injunction to stop the construction of the Stroudwater. On the 14th of July 1775, that injunction was passed, meaning that legally no more construction could take place. On the 21st of July at Chancery Lane in London, Richard Hoare and Benjamin Glazebrook were given their side of the story, saying why it was vital that the canal needed to go through Carter's Close, because this is the only section of the Severn where boats could turn in, heading inland. Other bits had big sandbanks either side, like you can see. Well, you can't see them because we're at high tide, but there are sandbanks either side, meaning that this section here at Framilode is the only feasible bit to a few miles north and to the few miles south of here. And obviously they were trying to strike through into the Stroud Valleys. They urged their case, and they were also supported by Robert Whitworth, who was later to become a chief engineer on the Thames and Severn Canal. Unfortunately, all of those hard evidence was falling on deaf ears in Chancery Lane. On the 22nd of July 1775, the Chancery Lane legal team had decided that this needed to go further to the county assizes in the city of Gloucester, just a few miles north of to where I currently am on the banks of the River Severn. And that happened the following month, and the implications of that were damning for the Stroudwater Canal Company. On the 5th of August 1775, the County Assizes in Gloucester decided that the Stroudwater Committee had completely exceeded the original Act of 1730, and they were operating outside the boundaries. Furthermore, they had transgressed the legal team in terms of digging through Carter's Close, even though they were told that they didn't have the rights to build through it. So they needed to rank together, and they had another meeting on the 24th of July back at the George in Froster to decide what they could do next. Now, they had two things that they could do. They could cut their losses and wide the whole thing up. So this would again be a fourth failure to build navigation here on the Stroudwater after the previous 3 attempts, but they would lose everything they'd invested, or they could go and appeal for an Act of Parliament to start again, to start afresh, appeal to Parliament and pass a new Act allowing the Stroudwater to be built. So what did they decide to do? In early September, a new bill called the Case for the Stroudwater Navigation was proposed and put forward to Parliament. It went through the shareholders, and in October of that year it also went through to Parliament. Of course, in the meantime, it meant that no work could take place, no work through Carter's Close, no more work at Framilode at all, and it was holding up the building of the Stroudwater Navigation here in Gloucestershire. On the 8th of March 1776, the third bill went through Houses of Commons, and later on that month it went through the House of Commons, and it then reached finally royal assent. And it meant finally the following year, 1776, after the battle here of Carter's Close, finally work could recommence building the Stroudwater Navigation. And indeed that happened. And 4 years later, in 1780, a new canal was constructed from here at Upper Framilode alongside the River Severn all the way through to the town of Stroud, some 6 miles to the east of here, which later on, in many years later, was to link up with another canal called the Thames and Severn. But of course, that's another story. The Battle of Carter's Close had finally been settled, but on after a lot of trouble, legal ramifications and money lost towards the company and the shareholders. That's it for today here on West Country Wanderings, the end of the secrets of the Stroudwater for the moment, but there'll be another episode. But before there's another episode of the Stroudwater, I'll be doing another one in my Secrets of the Thames and Severn Canal. There'll also be an update looking at the Cotswold Canal's restoration over the next couple of months as well. Thank you very much for watching today, and I hope you can join me on the channel again very soon. All the best for now. Take care. Bye-bye.